The roasting pan was sitting on the stove with a dishcloth draped over the handle, the way someone puts a cloth when they've been cooking and want to seem tidy about it. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen and stared at it. I could still smell the rosemary and the garlic and the ras el hanout I'd blended from scratch the night before. The smell was in everything: my coat, the hallway, the warm air coming off the vent by the door. It was exactly the smell I'd been imagining for 9 hours while I sat in a dental chair on the 6th floor of a building on Burrard Street, counting down the last patients of the day. I had bought that rack of lamb on Saturday morning at the specialty butcher near the east entrance of Granville Island Market. Zas, $42. It was a beautiful Frenched rack, the kind you buy when you've decided a Tuesday is going to mean something. I'd marinated it for 18 hours in the spice blend, preserved lemon rind, fresh garlic, good olive oil. I'd texted Lucas at noon to say I was making it for dinner tonight, that we were finally going to sit down together and eat an actual meal at an actual table, not takeout over the sink while we scrolled through things on our phones. He'd texted back, "Perfect, can't wait." That was what I was thinking about on the SkyTrain from Broadway City Hall. The lamb. The Pinot Noir I'd picked up from the BC liquor store on Kingsway. The particular silence of a weeknight dinner when you've earned it. I heard voices before I reached the door of our unit, low and comfortable, the cadence of a conversation well into its rhythm. I put my key in the lock and opened the door. There were 4 women in my living room. Rosalind Brandt was in the armchair by the window, the one she always chose when she came over, claimed through repetition rather than invitation. On the sofa across from her were 3 women I had never seen in my life. 2 were approximately her age, the kind of comfortable, retired woman presentation that suggests book clubs and good walking shoes. 1 was somewhat younger. Their coats were draped over the back of the sofa in a way that meant they'd been there long enough to get settled. Lucas was not in the living room. The roasting pan was on the stove. I could see the handle from where I stood. Rosalind looked up at me, and her face did the thing I had seen it do before, rearranged itself into a particular kind of warmth. Not the warmth that comes naturally, the kind that comes quickly, that's already calculating something while it's still arriving. "Camille," she said in a bright and uncomplicated voice. "You're home, love. Come sit down. There's still some lamb left. You could heat it up." I put the potatoes in the pot on the back burner. She said it the way you'd say there's soup on the stove to a tired child, the way you'd say it in your own home. "Who are these people?" I said. I said it quietly. I am a quiet person by temperament, which has sometimes been mistaken for calm I don't actually possess. "Oh, this is my book club," Rosalind said, gesturing at the 3 women with the ease of someone who sees no problem at all with the current situation. Sandra, Donna, and Philippa. We were meeting at Sandra's place, but her furnace went out this afternoon, so I thought, I have a key. It's warmer here. We'll just come over. I knew you had that lovely lamb ready, so I thought, why let it go cold? We'd all enjoy it. She said it the way reasonable explanations are supposed to neutralize unreasonable actions. The door to the second bedroom opened. Lucas came out holding his laptop. His face, when he saw me, did a quick and complicated series of things. Surprise, then a careful neutrality. I recognized the way you recognize a familiar road at night, by shape and feel, not by sight. He was calculating. "Hey," he said, "you're home." "I am," I said. A silence in which all 3 women on the sofa became very interested in their mugs of tea. Lucas walked to the kitchen. He set his laptop on the counter. He looked at me, and then at the living room and back at me, and he said, in a voice working hard to stay light, "There's still some lamb, actually. And Mom brought potatoes. We could eat in the bedroom, maybe? There's not quite enough room out here, and they're not staying long." I heard that sentence very clearly. I want to say exactly what I heard inside it because it wasn't the words. It was the shape of the request. He was asking me to take my dinner. The dinner I had texted him about at noon, the dinner I'd been thinking about since I woke up, and eat it on the edge of our bed so that his mother's book club could keep using my living room. He was asking me to absorb this and not let it become a thing. I was still in my coat, my bag was still on my shoulder, the bottle of wine was in my hand. I walked into the kitchen. I looked at the roasting pan. There were 2 pieces of lamb remaining, the thin tail-end cuts that cook unevenly and that no one chooses first when there are better options. A moderate amount of potatoes in the pot, gone a little dry around the edges. I looked at those 2 pieces for a long moment. Then I set the wine down on the counter. To understand why what came next happened the way it happened, you need to understand more than that one evening. You need to understand the 1.5 years that preceded it. My name is Camille Arden. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Abbotsford and moved to Vancouver at 22 for school and stayed, the way a lot of people stay, because the city gets its hooks in you, and eventually home is somewhere else entirely. I've worked as a registered dental hygienist for 8 years at a mid-size clinic in the West End. Lucas Brandt and I have been together for 6 years, living together in a 2-bedroom condo in East Vancouver for 4 of them. We are not engaged. We have discussed it in the vague, future-oriented way that feels like planning without actually being planning. We call each other partner. We have a shared lease, shared grocery habits, a shared calendar that neither of us updates as often as we should, and one very elderly cat named Fig who sleeps on the heating vent and does not care about any of this. Lucas's father, Bernard, died 2.5 years ago. A heart attack on a Tuesday in October while he was raking leaves in the backyard of the house in Surrey where Lucas grew up, 61 years old. Quick, in the way that sometimes seems merciful until you realize what it takes from the people left behind. Rosalind was 60 when she lost him. She had taught grade 4 in Surrey for 29 years. She was the kind of woman who ran things, the school fundraisers, the block watch, the neighborhood Christmas hamper drive. She knew which house had a new baby and which one was going through something and who needed meals brought by. When Bernard died, all of that organizational energy turned inward, and it turned toward Lucas and eventually toward our apartment, which was where Lucas lived. She called twice a day in the early months. That was grief, and I understood it. She started stopping by with groceries, with food she'd made, with small things she said she happened to be dropping off. That was also grief, and I tried to understand it. 14 months ago, Lucas gave her a key. Just for emergencies, he said. It'll give her peace of mind. I said I wasn't sure I was comfortable with it. He said she'd never actually use it unless something was wrong. I told myself he knew his mother. I told myself that extending patience to a grieving woman was the right thing to do, and that I was capable of it, and that the discomfort I felt was something I could carry quietly. I carried it for over a year. Rosalind used the key within the first 2 weeks, once, to drop something off when we were both at work, which I discovered because she'd left a Tupperware on the counter and a note in her handwriting on the kitchen whiteboard. I told myself it was fine. Then, she came on a Thursday afternoon while I was home alone and wanted to sit and visit, and I sat and visited because I didn't know how to say I'd been looking forward to those 2 hours of silence. Then she came and found a pen in the hallway table drawer and happened to mention she'd had a look through the drawer while she was there because it seemed cluttered. I started keeping a note in my phone in February, 8 months after she got the key. I gave each entry a date and a brief description. I started keeping it when I realized I was no longer absorbing these visits. I was bracing for them. and then reviewing them afterward, turning them over, trying to assess whether I was being unreasonable. By the November evening in question, I had 37 entries. Some of them were small: a reorganized spice shelf, throw cushions moved to different positions, the bathroom cabinet under the sink resorted into a system that made sense to Rosalind, with small matching baskets from a dollar store she'd brought along and installed without asking. Some of them were not small. Twice she'd called the dental clinic when she couldn't reach Lucas, leaving messages with our front desk staff that said it was a family matter. Messages that alarmed two of my colleagues, who asked me if everything was all right. And then there was the card. 8 months before the lamb dinner, I had figured out, from an offhand comment Rosalind made about the hallway table being cluttered, that she had gone through the top drawer and disposed of things she deemed unnecessary. I had kept a card in that drawer, a card from my Nana Jean, sent 4 years ago when I was going through a genuinely difficult period. A job transition, the early uncertainty of moving in with Lucas, a particular kind of mid-20s exhaustion I hadn't known how to name. She wrote 3 pages inside it, in pencil, because her hands weren't quite as steady as they'd been. She had been diagnosed with vascular dementia the following year. She lost her words slowly, and then she lost them, and she died 18 months ago. Those 3 pages were the last real letter she ever wrote to me. I had put the card in the top drawer of the hallway table because I wanted it close, but I didn't know where else to keep it, and I am not a person who frames things or puts them in albums. It was just in the drawer. It looked, I suppose, like paper. I tried to tell Lucas about it the week I realized it was gone. I got through about half of the sentence before I couldn't continue, and he said it must have been a mistake that his mother would never have knowingly. And I let him say that because it was easier and because I had nowhere to put what I was feeling, that didn't seem disproportionate to the observable evidence, which was just an absence, an empty place in a drawer. I filed it in the back part of my mind and put something else in front of it. Until November. I walked out of the kitchen. I walked back to the living room. I stood in the middle of it, still in my coat, and I spoke at a level that was audible without being raised. I need Rosalind's guests to please collect their things. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need everyone to head out. The room went very still. Sandra looked at her mug. Donna put her hands on her knees. Philippa looked at Rosalind with the expression of someone who is beginning to understand they may have walked into something. Camille. Rosalind said my name with a flatness that meant she was calibrating. These are my friends. We'll be done in less than an hour, I told Lucas. I understand, I said. This isn't about anyone in this room doing something wrong. But I'd like my home back this evening, and I need everyone who doesn't live here to head out. Philippa moved first. She picked up her coat from the sofa back, touched Donna's arm, said quietly, "Come on." None of them made eye contact with me when they left, which I didn't take personally. They hadn't done anything. They'd been invited somewhere and they'd shown up. It took less than 5 minutes for the 3 of them to be out the door. I thanked them for coming because I was raised right, and I meant it, and I closed the door. The 3 of us stood in the apartment. The roasting pan was on the stove, between us like something that had been entered into evidence. That was unnecessary, Rosalind said. She'd recovered her composure faster than I expected, which is a skill she has, resetting to a position of dignity before the situation can settle into what it actually is. Those women drove across town in the rain, and I don't see why. Rosalind, I turned to face her directly. Do you know what was in that pan? Lamb, she said, which was marinated and ready, and I thought, a $42 rack of lamb from a butcher at Granville Island, I said. I made the spice blend from scratch on Friday night. I marinated it for 18 hours. I texted Lucas at noon today to tell him specifically that I was making it tonight. I finished an 8-month BCIT certification course last week that I've been working toward on evenings I was already exhausted. That dinner was something I was doing for myself. I stopped, the room was quiet. And I came home to find the end pieces left in the pan. "There's quite a bit on the potatoes still," she said. "The potatoes that have been sitting on the stove since you cooked them." Lucas had not moved. He was standing by the kitchen counter with both hands on the edge of it and his eyes on the floor. "You've had a key to this apartment for 14 months, I said. In those 14 months, you've let yourself in unannounced 37 times. I have the dates. I started keeping them in February because I wanted to know if I was counting correctly." Rosalind opened her mouth. I kept going. "You reorganized the bathroom cabinet without asking. You've called my clinic twice to leave messages with the front desk saying it was a family matter, messages that worried people I work with. You've moved things in this apartment that weren't yours to move. And 8 months ago, you went through the top drawer of the hallway table while you were here, and you threw away a card." Lucas looked up. "It was a card from my grandmother," I said. "She sent it to me 4 years ago, 3 pages written by hand and pencil. She had vascular dementia the following year. She lost the ability to write coherent sentences within 18 months of sending that card. She died last year. Those 3 pages were the last letter she ever wrote to me." No one said anything. "I know you didn't know what it was," I said. "I know you weren't trying to take something from me. But you assumed that anything in this home that you didn't recognize the value of had no value. And you have been making that assumption, in small ways and larger ones, for over a year." Rosalind sat down heavily in the armchair. Not with drama, more like the air simply left her. Lucas came around the counter. He stood near me. Not between us, just near. "Mom," he said, and his voice had the tone of someone who has been composing a sentence for a long time and is finally saying it out loud. "I need you to go home tonight. I'll call you tomorrow and we'll talk properly. But I need you to go, and I need to ask you to leave the key." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she got up. She got her coat. She opened her purse and took out her key ring and worked the key off slowly, and she set it on the small table by the door without ceremony. She kissed Lucas on the cheek. She did not speak to me. She left. The door closed. Lucas and I stood in the apartment. I could hear the rain against the windows, the particular sound of November in Vancouver, quiet and continuous. He heated the remaining lamb and the potatoes. I opened the wine. We ate standing at the kitchen counter because neither of us wanted to sit at the table yet. The table still had 4 mugs on it, tea rings on the surface. Rosalind's reading glasses she'd forgotten in the armchair, which I set on the counter and did not think about. "The card," Lucas said after a while. "Yeah. I should have done more when you told me. I was hoping it would sort itself out, and I let that be an excuse." "You did," I said, "and I let you because I was too tired to keep pushing." He nodded. He looked honest in a way he sometimes doesn't allow himself to look, and I found that more valuable in that moment than an apology. He drove to Surrey that Saturday. He sat at Rosalind's kitchen table and had the real conversation instead of the managed version. He told me everything about it afterward, that she cried, that he let her cry, that he kept going. He told her about the grief support group that met on Wednesday evenings at the community center 3 blocks from her house. Something his cousin had mentioned months ago that Lucas had filed away and never brought up. He told her clearly that the unannounced visits needed to stop, that the key would not be replaced, that she was loved and she was welcome in our home. But that welcome meant coming when invited, not arriving when the impulse struck. She said she'd think about the group. She did more than think about it. By January, she was attending every Wednesday. By March, she had exchanged numbers with 2 women there, both widowed in the past few years, both trying to figure out what comes after. She started mentioning them the way you mention people who are actually in your life. Small things, what one of them had said, a plan they were making. The texture of a social world that was hers and not borrowed from ours. She texts now before she comes. She sits where there's room. She brought a butter tart recipe 2 months ago and asked if I wanted to make them together, and I said yes. And we made an unnecessary number of them on a Sunday afternoon, and it was genuinely fine. Better than fine. I stopped keeping the list in my phone sometime in late winter. Not because things resolved into something clean and uncomplicated. Relationships like this one don't, and anyone who says otherwise is selling a version of the story that's easier to tell than to live. I stopped because I no longer needed it the way I had. I'd built that list for myself, to prove to myself that the thing I was feeling was real. To make sure I hadn't miscounted. To hold the evidence somewhere outside my own head so I could look at it when I started to wonder if I was being unreasonable. I was not being unreasonable. The list confirmed it. And once it had done that job, I didn't need to keep adding to it. My Nana Jeans card is gone, and that's the one part of this that doesn't resolve. Whatever she wrote in it. 3 pages, in the handwriting that was already not quite steady. I'll never know. I've made something like peace with that. Not a clean peace. Something that sits beside the loss instead of fighting it. What I do have is a front door that opens when I expect it to. A home that functions like mine. A rack of lamb, when I decide to make one, that gets eaten by the people I chose to share it with. Lucas and I still haven't set a date. I want to be honest about that too. We are still, in the loosest sense, in the same position we were in before that November evening. But something shifted between us that was necessary, and we both know it. He stopped managing things by hoping they'd resolve. I stopped accepting management as a substitute for being heard. Those are not small changes. In a relationship of 6 years, in a condo that took 3 years of careful budgeting to make work, in a city that requires you to fight for every square foot you actually occupy. Those changes are the entire point. The key sits in a small ceramic bowl on the entryway table. My key to my home. There's only one of it now, and I know exactly where it is. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's mine.